Good evening. You're watching the main news on ATV. I'm Heyling Chan.
And I'm Joanne Wong. Here are tonight's top stories.
Leung Chun-ying visits Beijing to accept appointment letter and meet senior leaders.
More than 40 Hong Kong holidaymakers injured in bus crash in Guangdong.
Inflation in China rises to 3.6% on higher vegetable prices. Chief Executive-elect Leung Chun-ying has arrived in Beijing to meet senior leaders and collect his formal letter of appointment.
Shortly before his arrival, a senior Beijing official said the problem of mainland mothers can be resolved and the controversial national security law will be passed only when there's a consensus in the city. Chief Executive-elect Leung Chun-ying flew to Beijing this afternoon to receive the formal letter appointing him as Hong Kong's new leader starting on the 1st of July. Before his departure, Leung addressed concerns over his cabinet, saying he'll try to include talented people whether or not they supported him in the chief executive election. He said he'll pass on to Beijing the names of those with a sense of responsibility and a willingness to serve Hong Kong as part of his incoming administration. During his 4-day visit to the capital, Hong Kong's incoming chief executive will meet President Hu Jintao and other leaders. They include Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office Director Wong Wong today met a delegation of visiting Hong Kong unionists and voiced support for Leung as Hong Kong's next chief executive. The senior Chinese official said Leung's victory after just one round of balloting last month reflected that he has the recognition, approval, and trust of society. Referring to the bitter chief executive campaign and the casting of blank ballots by some election committee members, Wang said it's normal for people to support different candidates. But now that the race is over, he urged Hong Kong people to open a new chapter by burying their differences and getting behind a new leader for the benefit of everyone in the city. However, Civic Party leader Alan Leung thinks the chief executive-elect, also known as C.Y. Leung, has to play his part first.
Any reconciliation must have a basis. We must be able to trust not only C.Y. Leung, but the Central People's Government before there can be reconciliation.
The lawmaker was referring to issues such as universal suffrage for the next chief executive election and whether Beijing would force the Hong Kong government to adopt a national security law. Economic synergy legislator Jeffrey Lam, who supported Leung's rival Henry Tang, was in favor of Hong Kong uniting behind the new leader.
We are already facing the economic tsunamis from Europe as well as from the United States. If we do not have a united front against all possible attacks from the financial industries, it would not be good for the Hong Kong society. So I think we should put down whatever happens during the election period, and we should work together with the new government.
Federation of Trade Unions President Cheng Yu-tong said Wang also touched on a number of sensitive issues, including the controversy of mainland women flooding Hong Kong hospitals to give birth so that their babies can become permanent residents. Cheng quoted Wang as saying the problem of mainland mothers may eventually have to be resolved through legal means, possibly within this year. Wang also discussed the highly unpopular national security legislation under Article 23 of the Basic Law. The Beijing official gave an assurance that there's no timetable to implement the law and that there must be a consensus in society before the legislation can be enacted. But Wang also noted that Hong Kong has a constitutional responsibility to legislate Article 23, pointing out that other countries also have national security laws. 4 Hong Kong residents remain in hospital in Guangdong after their coach crashed yesterday, injuring more than 40 people.
The other tourists began returning home today on board 4 special coaches provided by the bus company. ATV's Arthur Keeler reports.
Pictures posted on the internet showed the aftermath of the accident in Shanwei City yesterday. The tourist coach turned on its side in the middle of the road in Guangdong province. The bus was carrying 47 passengers and was making its way to Hong Kong when the accident happened at around 3 p.m. The coach was driving into an expressway when it overturned while trying to avoid a motorcycle. More than 40 passengers were injured. Those who were slightly hurt received first aid on the spot, but 31 were sent to hospital, where some were treated for broken bones. The bus company said it quickly sent staff to the scene to assess the situation and make sure the injured received immediate treatment. The company's managing director, Wong, said that most of the tourists were on their way back to Hong Kong on board 4 special coaches which were sent to fetch them. Hong Kong officials in Guangdong said they received more than 30 calls for assistance from the passengers. They maintained contact with them and their families and coordinated efforts with the immigration department and the bus company to ensure that they got back to Hong Kong safely. Mrs. Ng said at the time of the accident she couldn't see what was happening and she was thrown about the bus. Mr. Ng was sleeping when the crash occurred and remembered waking up in pain. And all 11 members of the Ng family were injured. This isn't the first accident on the mainland involving coaches this year. In February, 15 people were killed when a bus carrying 33 people crashed on a highway in Shanxi province and plunged into a ravine. And 18 people died in January when a tourist coach fell off a highway bridge in Guizhou province in southwest China. Investigators blamed that crash on bad weather and human error, saying the driver was tired at the time. Arthur Urquiola, ATV News.
8 marine police were injured when their vessels collided while on patrol.
An investigation has been launched into the pre-dawn crash. The 2 boats involved in the collision were towed to a marine police base in Ma Liu Shui and Shatin. The hulls and seats on the vessels were badly damaged. The boats collided at around 4 a.m. during an anti-smuggling operation launched by Marine Police in the waters off Yanqiao Tong. 8 officers were injured and taken to North District Hospital and Prince of Wales Hospital. Most of them suffered minor injuries to the waist and legs. The cause of the crash is still under investigation.
Inflation in China edged up to 3.6% last month, driven by rising food costs. The figure, though, was below the government's target of 4% for the whole year. China's inflation rate last month was slightly above expectations. The Consumer Price Index, the main gauge of inflation, rose 3.6% in March from 3.2% in February. Although inflation increased last month, it's now 2 months in a row that it's below the government's target of 4% for the whole year.
The only way to control inflation is to tighten the interest rate on the monetary policy.
But whether the central government will act immediately on the new data remains to be seen. Inflation was driven higher by food prices because of unusually cold weather last month. That's worrying for authorities as they struggle to keep costs of people's biggest expense down to avoid social unrest, especially ahead of an historic leadership transition later this year. Vegetable prices were up 6.5% last month from February, but the cost of pork, a diet staple, fell 4.8%. There's also concern over inflationary pressure after Beijing raised the price of petrol last month in line with changes to the international market. Although fuel isn't given a big weighting in calculating the CPI, economists warn that the knock-on effect of higher oil costs should not be ignored. Beijing isn't taking any chances. Analysts expect more monetary policy tightening measures over the next few months.
It takes time, maybe 1 to 2 years for the monetary policy to be effective. So if they would like to control the longer-term inflation, they have to do that now and maybe for some successive times so that the inflation can be controlled in the future.
First quarter economic data, due to be released on Friday, is expected to confirm the slowdown of expansion in the world's second largest economy. But views are mixed on whether today's data will prompt the central bank to hold back on monetary policy easing for now. It's already lowered lenders' reserve requirement ratio twice in the past 4 months, effectively increasing the amount of money people can borrow. More cash in the market means prices should go up, which in turn should spur growth in the slowing economy. Global financial troubles like Europe's sovereign debt crisis and America's weak job growth numbers released last week are contributing to the slowdown. Turning overseas, North Koreans have begun celebrating the centenary of the birth of their late founding president, Kim Il-sung.
But a satellite launch planned for later this week, as well as rumors of an imminent nuclear test, have the rest of the region on edge. ATV's Ben O'Rourke reports.
Music blares out across Pyongyang as North Koreans begin celebrating the 100th birthday of the country's late founder Kim Il-sung. Thousands gather near mosaic portraits of Kim and his son and heir, Kim Jong-il, who died in December. Women wipe tears from their eyes as the crowds cheer and wave flowers while listening to officials hail the great progress the country is making under the current leader, Kim Jong-un, the founder's grandson. A testament to that is the imminent launch of a rocket carrying a satellite into space, timed to coincide with the centenary. This satellite will have a very significant meaning in terms of our economic development and improving people's living standards, said this scientist working on the space program. But the apparent giant leap in North Korea's development isn't being seen as such by the US and its regional allies. They believe the rocket is really a prototype, long-range missile that Pyongyang could pack a nuclear warhead onto and fire at will. Jang Myeon-jin, director of the West Sea satellite launch site, dismissed suggestions it's a missile. If it were a missile, it would have to be hidden in an underground chamber, he insisted. The North has gone out of its way to reassure the world by inviting scientists from several space agencies and the media to come and watch the launch. But Pyongyang's efforts at transparency have been met with extended sanctions, cuts in food aid and numerous other diplomatic restrictions, while NASA declined the invitations to view the launch. The skeptics, led by Washington, say that's because of a United Nations resolution forbidding the North from testing missiles, passed after Pyongyang's underground nuclear test in 2009. Japan and South Korea have threatened to shoot down the rocket if it passes over their territory. The Defense Ministry in Seoul said today it's closely monitoring North Korea. Spokesman Kim Min-seok said the launch may take place on Saturday, but it depends on the weather. Adding to the regional anxiety of the launch, South Korean media reports say intelligence officials believe the North may be preparing for another nuclear test.
So these are the grandfather and grandmother of the...
Despite the controversy and international intrigue surrounding the launch, celebrations in the North will carry on regardless, with thousands of locals and tourists streaming through Kim Il-sung's birthplace museum. Ben O'Rourke, ATV News.
After the break on ATV's main news, a truce is scheduled to take effect in Syria this week, but peace prospects are dim.
And Bubba Watson wins Masters in dramatic fashion in playoff.